I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Today on Hard Knocks, I interview my friend Katie Herzog, a journalist living out of the Pacific Northwest. She is the co-host of the podcast Blocked and Recorded and a former staff writer for the Seattle alt weekly, The Stranger. She is the author of the new book, Drink Your Way Sober, The Science-Based Method to Break Free from Addiction. And in this episode, we talk about the relationship between shame and addiction, how the abstinence-only model doesn't work for everyone and what alternatives there are, and just general ideas about how to recover and think about your identity as a person if you are experiencing addiction. So I hope you really love this episode. Katie is so smart, and as always, a wonderful listen. Katie, welcome to Hard Knocks.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
It's good to have you. I'm excited to talk to you. You have a new book coming out called Drink Your Way Sober. And I say coming out, but when is it? What is the actual launch?
September 30th.
Drink Your Way Sober, the science-based method to break free from addiction. This is part a personal thing and a journalistic thing for you. So I kind of want to tackle both at the same time, and I'm interested in this because, one, there's alcoholism, just generally in my family. My grandfather died from alcoholism, but also, in prison, I encountered a lot of addiction issues in the women around me, and it felt like there were very limited options for how to approach that problem. So talk to me about how you found yourself in this scenario and started looking for solutions.
Yeah. So I first had kind of the realization, my first come to Jesus moment when I was young. I think I was 24. And at the time I was going through my first real serious romantic breakup. My girlfriend at the time, we had moved across the country together. We lived together. So my first real serious relationship, and alcohol sort of destroyed that relationship, and not alcohol alone, alcohol and what I would do when I was drinking. And I wasn't abusive or anything like that, but I was a shitty girlfriend, basically. And all of this sort of came to a head. I was confronted by my own terribleness in one moment, a very dramatic moment. The long story short of it is that I cheated on my girlfriend, and this was back in the MySpace days. So she found out from reading a MySpace message.
Oh God!
Yeah, this would have been. You would have been in prison during.
Hey.
So both of us in prison.
Yeah.
Both of us having a hard time in our early 20s, and she came to the bakery where I had just gotten a job, and she hit me in the face. She slapped me in the face over the counter. So I lost my girlfriend and my job and my home in one very brief day.
Wow.
A very long day, actually. And so in that moment where I'm sort of sitting on the curb outside of my house with all of my things strewn about the yard, like a scene from a bad movie, that literally happened to me. My teddy bear, my childhood teddy bear, face down in a puddle.
Oh God.
Yeah. Definitely her fault for sure. I had my first sort of oh shit moment where I was I've done something very bad here. And why did I do this? And the answer was glaringly obvious. And that was that I was an alcoholic. I was a drunk. And so I had that experience. And then I pretty quickly sort of shelved that information and looked for any other excuse for my behavior. At one point, I convinced myself that it was because I was a Gemini. I'm actually a Taurus, so that didn't work. Also, astrology is bullshit. But
I love that you tried that.
Right,
though.
It was the moment.
It's not the alcohol; it's the horoscope.
Right. I was living in Portland, lots of lesbians around me. Horoscope was the natural answer. And so there's this term that I didn't come up with this term, but I like it. Vacillating denial. So I lived in vacillating denial about my problem. I would sort of be faced with it at various times and have this stark realization that I had a really serious drinking problem. And then I would, no, I just like to party. I'm young. I'm fun.
You're 24.
I'm 24.
Yeah.
All of my friends are drinkers, heavy drinkers. I came up in heavy drinking communities. And that allowed me to sort of live in denial at some moments. But in the back of my mind, I always knew that there was a problem. And I did try to do things about it. So I went to AA. I went to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist diagnosed me as bipolar, not bipolar 2, like bipolar light, like bipolar 1, the really bad one. I'm not bipolar. It was the complete, it was one of those like 15 minutes with a psychiatrist. I tell him some patterns of behavior and he says you're bipolar. Really the pattern, the root of the bad behavior was all alcohol. But that was great. I wanted that diagnosis because that was not just an excuse for my bad behavior, but also I thought, well, if I'm bipolar, I don't have to drink because of course alcohol is great for bipolar people. Anyway, misdiagnosis. And so I lived like that for another almost 15 years. Yeah. And I did, my life wasn't in shambles. Like at different times it was in shambles, but I did sort of get my shit together over the years. I got a career. I was in more stable relationships. I bought a house. I got a dog. I did gradually hit those kind of markers for adulthood, maybe later than I should have, but I did hit those markers. And I was sort of living, and I was living in this way where like I could have periods of sobriety, but never very long. And the real problem was that alcohol was always on my mind. So I was obsessed with alcohol. I was consumed by alcohol when I could drink. If I was going to drink, knowing that I shouldn't drink, it was always on my mind. And it was that level of obsession, which maybe you've experienced. I imagine you probably have, particular in I'm sure there are things that you were unable to get out of your mind for long periods of time. It's a sort of prison, not your kind of prison, but a different kind of prison. Just having all of your attention focused on this thing. So I could go to work, I could have relationships, I could have a life, but always in the back of my mind, I was thinking about drinking. And so I did like find an escape from that, but it took a lot of experimentation and a lot of years of suffering.
Yeah. So talk to me about that process of experimentation, because you're a person who is willing to challenge the status quo, willing to go against, you're willing to experiment with yourself and find real solutions. And I'm curious to know, like, in the process of looking for first of all, approaching what is the medically established status quo in response to alcoholism and then trying to find other solutions, was that informed at all by any of your reporting experience in challenging certain medical diagnoses and the way that people go about that?
So not at first. At first, I did the thing that everybody does, which is go to AA. And AA really didn't work for me. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. Like AA works really well for some people, but for me, I'm a natural skeptic. And I'm also not a joiner. And so and I'm also, there's some irony in the fact that I wrote this book that's very personal because I really don't like talking about personal shit. I don't like to process. I'm a lesbian who doesn't process. I'm in a club of one. I don't like talking about feelings. And there's a lot of that in AA and that sort of stuff. Like listening to other people talk about their feelings is fine. I enjoy that. Well, maybe the feelings not so much, but the stories. AA has a lot of really good storytellers. But that to me, it just it makes me bristle. I'm sort of naturally uncomfortable in situations like that. So I don't know that AA was ever going to work for me just because of kind of my personality. Like I'm the type of person who would go to an AA meeting and be thinking like, well, what are the recidivism rates of this program? What does the data say? Have there been meta-analyses of the efficacy rates of this particular program? You're talking.
Have there?
Yes, there have been.
Okay, great.
AA is really effective for some people. Not like the majority of people who walk into an AA meeting are probably not going to be still attending AA a year later, but about half might not be attending AA, but about half will have their lives will have improved, which is actually pretty good for any recovery program because recovery is really hard.
Is AA like the CrossFit of confronting alcoholism? Is that a comparison?
Maybe in the sense that there is this sort of totalitizing I mean, I'm not going to use the word cult. Other people would use the word cult, but it like takes over, for some people, it really takes over their identity. So I've been to AA meetings where there are people who haven't had a drink for 50 years who are still going to AA every single day. And I think part of that is because it's very social and that's where their friends are, and it's a routine and it's something to do and it's a place to go. And that can be really important for people suffering from addiction. But for me, it wasn't what I needed. It wasn't what I wanted. And the biggest problem that I had with AA was that AA didn't correct my fundamental problem, which was that I wanted to keep drinking. So it didn't do anything for the physical cravings that dominated my brain. And, I could go and you can learn tools to deal with the cravings. And there are other programs as well, like ones that are a little bit less faith-based, that principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, think about your triggers. Here are some coping mechanisms for your triggers. But my problem is that I have very little willpower. And like, if I got a craving for alcohol, I was out the door as soon as it hit. And I was never able to white knuckle my way through that or rationalize my way through that. I was completely driven by this physical craving. And so when I was looking for a way to get sober, not even to get sober, but a way to fix this problem, what I was looking for was a way to eliminate the urge. I wanted no desire from alcohol. I wanted that part
You
gone.
wanted to be neutered
Yes.
of this issue. Yes. Okay.
Spade. Yes.
Turn off my brain, my alcohol brain.
Yes.
Okay.
That is what I wanted. And when I first started trying when I first was sort of had the realization that I was an alcoholic, I wasn't aware of any particular treatment program or medication that could do that. And it took many years of Googling how to get sober with AA to sort of find the treatment that would offer that solution. And I eventually did, which is what the book is about.
Okay, cool. And it's called the Sinclair method, correct? And it involves something called naltrexone. Is that correct? Okay. How deep in the weeds of the internet did you have to go to find this thing? And when you're deep in the woods of the internet, in the weeds of the internet, how much faith do you have in what information is being presented to you?
Yeah. So the first time I heard of the Sinclair method was not deep in the woods of the internet. It was through an Atlantic article. The article came out in 2015. It was written by Gabrielle Glasser. And she had written a book around that same time called, I'm forgetting that. It was something about why women drink and something. And so I had read this article, and the article was really about AA, about sort of the failures of AA, but part of the article mentioned this thing called the Sinclair method. And Gabby had been developed in Finland by an American researcher in Finland. And she went to Finland and she met this guy and she learned about this process. And so that was my first clue. So I read that. It was years before I would actually do it myself, but I sort of had that in the back of my mind. And the way it works is it's medication-based assisted therapy. So you take a very cheap generic opioid blocker called naltrexone, and it binds to the receptors in your brain that get an endorphin rush when you drink alcohol. And not everybody gets an endorphin rush. And this is why naltrexone works for some people and doesn't work for others. But when I drink alcohol, and I'm curious if this is your experience, Amanda, when I drink alcohol, it's almost like I get energized. I get high. I don't get sleepy. Maybe later in the night after 6 or 7, I'll get sleepy. But those first drinks, what I get is it's almost like I've had caffeine or
you're invigorated.
I'm invigorated.
Totally. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm like the fun drunk at that stage, right? And so naltrexone targets that. When you take this drug and then you wait an hour, that's how long it takes, a minimum of an hour, that's how long it takes to metabolize. And then you drink alcohol on the drug, you don't get that effect. So you get this sort of, it feels kind of dull, kind of boring. And so anyway, that's the protocol, the Sinclair method. Take this pill, wait 1 hour, and then drink as normal. And so that's the thing that is so different about the Sinclair method than any other treatment I had heard of, because it didn't require abstinence. And that's what I wanted. I knew I needed to quit drinking, but I also knew I couldn't quit drinking, right? It's such a paradox. I couldn't will my way out of this or think my way out of this problem. And so for me, naltrexone, or the Sinclair method and naltrexone, allowed me to keep doing the thing that I was unable to quit doing, but it made me not like it anymore. Yeah. And so it worked really well for me. I did this for about 7 months, like in this very regimented way. Take the pill, wait an hour, then drink. Don't take the pill on days when you're not drinking, because you want your receptors to be unblocked so that you can sort of develop natural highs from this endorphin rush. And I did that for about 7 months. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to take a month off of drinking, something that if I had done before had always been a struggle, like counting the days down, making a tally like I'm in a prison cell myself, like day what? I made it. Yeah. And after a month, I didn't want to drink, and I haven't had a drink since. And that was 3 years ago.
Holy cow. Okay. So again, like I'm just trying to wrap my brain around how this works. So it's blocking the endorphin receptors. Does that mean that when you're on naltrexone, just like everything is kind of boring?
Yes. And because of this, so there are different ways to prescribe naltrexone. And the most common way, if you just went to your doctor today and you said, I want naltrexone, the chances are your doctor will not have actually heard of the Sinclair method. Another way of it's basically the targeted use. So you only take the pill in anticipation of drinking. You're trying to target this particular behavior. There's also research that it can work on other sort of negative behaviors that have similar physiological effects, like gambling. But if you went to your doctor would in all likelihood say, okay, take this pill every day. That's the way it's normally prescribed. The problem with that is that it blocks your endorphin receptors, right? So for me, like I didn't particularly like taking naltrexone because it made me feel sort of dull, a little depressed. I had some physical side effects. And if I had to do that every day, I just would have quit doing it. Right. But that is absolutely a way that it is commonly prescribed. And that way actually does work for some people. There's also a shot called Vivitrol. It's a shot in the butt. You get it once a month, and it's a slow release over time. Again, for me, I don't think that would work because the effects were so not like destabilizing, but I didn't like the way it made me feel.
Yeah. And that sounds like the whole point is it's like a slap on the hand for the thing that you're doing. So you're like giving yourself the slap on the hand in anticipation of the thing so that you get that negative reinforcement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You're retraining your brain. This process is called, the psychological or the term for this is called extinction. And so that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to unlearn a learned behavior. So it works really well for me, and it doesn't work for all people. Like I learned so much writing this book. And one of the things I learned was that the effects that I get from alcohol are not universal. So to simplify this, there's basically two types of drinkers: reward drinkers and relief drinkers. Reward drinkers are people who get that buzz, who get that high, that energy. Naltrexone tends to work pretty well for those people. These people, we also tend to be binge drinkers. Because naltrexone targets that particular physiological response. Relief drinkers are people who drink to calm down, people who get a sedating effect from alcohol. Naltrexone tends not to work very well for that type of drinkers.
So what does work for them? Yeah.
Well, to complicate things, some people are both. You start out with this sort of energetic high, and then later in life or later in the night, you're drinking for the sedating effect. There's 330 million people in this country, billions of people in the world. We all have different experiences. For those drinkers, so there are other drugs that can work. So I got this information from a clinician and researcher named Joe Vopicelli. He's one of the foremost experts in naltrexone and treatments for medication-based treatments for alcohol use disorder in the world. And there's a drug that I take that can actually work well for people who are looking for some sort of relief from social anxiety. Beta blockers. I take beta blockers for public speaking. Have you ever taken them? You seem very comfortable public speaking. Were you always comfortable?
I was in musicals, jazz hands. Yeah, I don't think I was ever worried about public speaking, I guess. Yeah. Just when your life is on the line and, if you say the wrong thing, they send you back to prison. There was a level of anxiety, but maybe could have used a beta blocker then.
Yeah. So beta blockers are mostly used for like a heart medication. But it also, it cuts the adrenaline response that from anxiety provoking situations. So if I do have to do public speaking, I get sort of the real, I get an adrenaline response and my hands will get shaky. And then that, the physiological response makes me nervous itself. I take a beta blocker, it cuts out that physiological response. I could sing the fucking national anthem in front of a Mets game and I'm a terrible singer. I just feel no nerves. So there are and both of these medications are incredibly safe. So there are other drugs that people can take, and there are also other coping mechanisms that you can develop that are take a little bit more effort and willpower than taking a pill and having a drink.
Resilience isn't free. I mean, technically it is, but ad-free resilience, that's a few bucks a month. Subscribe at amandaknox.substack.com for ad-free episodes of Hard Knocks, plus bonus episodes and essays that help you turn adversity into insight and navigate the chaos of life with a little more clarity. Because sometimes all you need is a little insight and someone who's already face-planted in the mud to talk you through it. So, considering that this is an effective method for certain kinds of drinkers, why is it that your typical doctor might not have heard of the Sinclair method?
Yeah, so there's several reasons for this. Part of it goes back to, and I should say naltrexone has been FDA approved for alcohol use disorder for over 30 years. So this isn't a new drug at all. But historically, medical education has basically ignored substance use disorders of all kinds. So I talk to doctors who have been working in this field, who have been working for years, ER doctors, general practitioners. And when they were doing their training, maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago, their entire medical education, so 4 years of med school, 4-year residency, and then whatever specialized training on top of that, they would have had maybe 1 hour of training on how to treat substance use disorders at all. For a lot of doctors, their only training was to attend a single AA meeting. So historically, medicine has just ignored this. This is changing in large part thanks to the opioid crisis. So now everybody who goes through a psych rotation, which as far as I know, all medical students do, will learn about the drugs that are FDA approved to treat alcohol use disorder. There's 3 of them, and there are drugs that can be used off-label to treat this sort of thing. So there has been a shift from these kind of abstinence-only based treatment programs to harm reduction, and naltrexone would be a form of harm reduction. And harm reduction has in recent years taken on this sort of political balance that might actually harm it, I think, long term, because when a lot of people think of harm reduction, they think of safe injection sites in Seattle or Vancouver. But harm reduction is a very large kind of philosophy. So that's part of it, is education. Another part of it, so even if doctors are familiar with naltrexone and prescribe naltrexone, you can imagine why they would be hesitant to tell alcoholics that they can drink, right? Giving someone permission to do the bad behavior that is destroying their life goes against everything that doctors have been taught, do no harm, right? And then there can be some legal issues there, right? So if your patient comes to you and says, I want to do the Sinclair method, I want to take this pill and I want to drink, and then goes out and kills someone drunk driving, are you going to be legally liable for that? So there are completely rational reasons that this particular treatment is not something that most doctors would prescribe. So because of that, this is one of the rare cases where, in my experience, none of my doctors had heard of the Sinclair method. They'd heard of naltrexone, some of them, but they'd never heard of the Sinclair method. So to them, naltrexone meant taking it every day and then not drinking. So take the pill and then be abstinent, which is not what I wanted to do. So I got better information from Facebook and from Reddit and from YouTube and from talking to people who had done this than I did from my own doctors.
Wow. So, but did that mean that you had to go to your doctors and explain, hey, just prescribe me the thing and I'll pretend I'll be abstinent, but I'm actually going to do the Sinclair method, and that's how I'm going to be able to actually deal with my addiction? Is that how it worked?
So the first time I got this drug prescribed was way back in like 2018. And I had read this article in the Atlantic, and I went and I printed out the article probably at work, brought it to my doctor and gave it to her and said, this is what I want to do. And she said, okay, try that, fine. Prescribe me the drug. So I went home and I got a beer on my way home, like a can of Hams or something. And I went home and I took the pill and I waited an hour and I felt awful, like nauseous, headachy, depressed, tried to drink the beer, could only choke down a little bit, like hated it. And I was so disappointed because I felt like, I thought, when I read that article, I was like, this is it. This is my miracle. This is what I've been looking for. And I had such a negative reaction to it that I just put it stowed it in the back of a cabinet somewhere and just didn't think about it for years. And then my drinking accelerated. COVID happened, so accelerated even more. And I had that bottle of pills. And so I thought, like, all right, I'm going to try this again. And this time I did a ton of research. I figured out that I should have started at a lower dose. So the standard dose is 50 milligrams. This time I started at 12 and a half. So a quarter of a pill. I took it with a full stomach, full glass of water, and I just prepared myself with as much information as I could find. Information I wasn't getting from my doctor, information I was getting online. And I was prepared for the side effects. I was prepared for kind of the mental effects of it. And then when I needed a prescription refill, I had a new doctor by that point because, of course, new doctor every 6 months. And this time I went to a doctor and I didn't explain what I was trying to do. I just asked for naltrexone and she gave it to me. And then I just did it, the way I wanted to.
Gosh, so I think the thing that really is disturbing about that is that you're having to doctor yourself. And there's no one who's just handily within your, no one who's your primary care provider who is actually giving you the information that you need. Is that something that's changing now?
Yeah.
Or
so because of COVID, there's been this huge rise in telemedicine, right? And now it's really easy to get a provider who specializes in naltrexone and is well-versed on the Sinclair method from your computer. So there are several different companies that do this. You pay sort of monthly, everything's a subscription service now. So you pay them monthly, you do check-ins with them. And then I don't know if they send the drugs directly to you or if they give you a prescription and you get it from your pharmacist. But there are specialists now who can work with individuals. And there's a lot of coaches too. So a lot of people who aren't medical providers, but who can help you work through sort of the challenges. And it is sort of deceptively simple, right? Take a pill, wait an hour and drink. But there are challenges with this. And it's not linear. So one of the things that people are encouraged to do is, and I found this really valuable, is track your drinks and, keep a chart. And when you look at almost anybody's chart, there's spikes and valleys. So it's not like, day 1, you're drinking a 6-pack, day 2, you're drinking 5, day 3, 4. It also can take people, it took me 7 months of active use. I sort of declared myself over at month 9. It takes some people, I've heard of it taking up to 3.5 years. So there can be a lot of challenges here. And coaches can be really helpful at helping people work through them.
I mean, it sounds like you have to be dedicated to being miserable for a while.
And that's one of the things that can be a challenge to people is non-compliance. So in the early studies of this drug, it was actually initially developed not for alcohol use disorder, but for opioid use disorder, what we would have called, heroin addiction, a few years ago. So and it was approved for that use in the 80s. And in the early studies, they found that this drug worked really well for certain populations. Pilots, doctors, nurses, people who had an addiction, but also had a job that required them to have all of their mental faculties, because you can't take methadone and go fly a plane, right? Naltrexone doesn't have any psychoactive effects like that. But for some populations, compliance is always going to be an issue with this. You have to be, it's like AA, you cannot half-ass it. You have to be really dedicated for this to work. And if you cheat, if you drink non-compliantly, it's probably not going to work long time. So I had a very small handful of times where I drank without taking the pill, but I was very regimented about it.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, back to the women that I met in prison, like the way that they were treated was the kind of methadone method where you're just getting a hit of the same feeling. So it would be like, how can I give you the buzz without giving you the drug? And I'm giving you a different drug. Is that part of the issue of why the conversation around addiction and recovery needs to be more nuanced, because there's a very different mental state for different people who are recovering from the same technical diagnosis? Clearly it sounds like the Sinclair method, for instance, wouldn't help someone who is down in the dumps, and so this is not for the recovery for them.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the broader goal of the book is to expand the conversation about what options are out there, right? And I talk to people who work in public health, whose clients are, they have many other psychological conditions. Oftentimes they're homeless. They have no support. They have no structure. For populations like that, this probably isn't going to be a miracle cure because it requires compliance. You have to be able to take your pill every time that you drink. And if you are living on the streets and just finding a place to bathe is a challenge, that's a lot to expect from people. And I asked one guy who works with that population, like, what do your clients need? And he said, or patients, and he said, a place to go. So this worked really well for me. I think it works well for people who are highly motivated, who are that first type of reward drinker. There are some physiological reasons why it won't work for some populations as well. There's the theory is that there's one particular genetic variant or allele that it's not 100% predictive, but it's a fairly strong predictor of whether or not it's going to work for people. So there's some biological basis on who it will and won't work for, but it tends to work best for people who are very highly motivated, who have some social support. I did this all in secret, by the way, so I sort of didn't have social support. I just did it on my own.
Really? Mm-hmm. Even hiding it from your friends and partners?
Yes. My wife. Yeah, I didn't tell anybody.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm a weirdo. It's the first thing they tell you in recovery is that you need social support. And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm not going to do it like that.
I'm good. Yeah. I'm good. I don't like people.
No, this is very personal, which is why it's so odd that I wrote a book about it. But yeah, so it's not going to work for everybody, but for people who do have these kind of, all of people who have the genetic, the correct sort of physiology and have the capacity to take the pill and the social support, it can be a miracle. It can be a lifesaver. It absolutely can.
Did I know that shame can play a role in the cycle of addiction? Is that relevant to the conversation here? Because it sounds like the issue for you was that high, that part of your brain that was like, this is my reward. But does shame play any role in that, or how does it?
Shame is huge. Shame is what kept me drinking, part of what kept me drinking for way longer than I should have. It kept me from seeking help. It kept me doing this secretly for years. When I decided to finally take control over this problem and do the Sinclair method, it kept me in doing this in secret. Shame is absolutely huge. I didn't tell my wife that I had done this for over a year after I had stopped drinking. And she was great. She wasn't mad. We're still married. She was completely supportive, and I knew that she would be. I was never worried about her leaving me or anything like that. I knew she would be fine, but I had an immense amount of shame about this. And shame also, during my drinking days, especially at the end, I would wake up every night at 3:30 or every morning at 3:30, just radiating shame, just with physical effects, but also so much shame. And that kept me drinking longer because I didn't know how to deal with that. The way of dealing with the shame was to drink more because it stopped me feeling like shit for just a little while. Of course, it would come back immediately, but it was like the solution and the problem itself.
Ay, ay, ay. So how do you address that? Is part of the process of treating yourself also building like self-compassion in order to be able to not, go to the source of your problem as also a solution to your problem?
Yeah, you have to build new coping mechanisms for sure. And that, I think one of the criticisms I'm going to get from the 12-step community is that this method doesn't require one to sort of confront their demons necessarily. Like you're taking care of a physical addiction, but a big part of AA is making amends to people. It's doing this deep moral inventory, really looking at yourself and saying, you're a fuck up, and this
you're
doesn't,
a piece of shit.
You piece of shit.
Which is a way to train your brain, I guess. Like it's a way of saying like, I'm associating all of these negative things with the alcohol, and like by throwing out the demon of alcohol, I am also addressing all of my demons and like being reborn,
right,
in a way.
Yes. And AA, I think AA can be for people who want that or who need that, or that's just part of their recovery. Like that's one of the things about AA that I do really appreciate is that being in a circle of other people who share that shame is really, it's freeing in a way because you realize that it's not you. It's not just that you're a piece of shit. It's that you're an addict, that your brain has been hijacked by this thing and you made bad choices. Yes. But so did all these other people. And another thing I like about AA is like, before I started going to meetings, and I don't attend meetings regularly now, but there have been periods in my life when I had this sort of impression that alcoholics were, like all down and out and probably ugly, like living under bridges. There's some hot people in AA, and so you really see the whole breadth of humanity suffers from this problem. There's no like uniting factor of alcoholics other than the fact that we are alcoholics. The spectrum of alcohol use disorder itself is very vast, and the spectrum of people who it affects is very vast. It's pretty universal. It totally is. It totally is. And I appreciate that AA kind of it makes that very obvious.
Do you see parallels between learning to manage alcohol use and other areas of life where we are attempting to regain control or like build resilience?
That's interesting. Yes, I do. I think for me, once I took care of the alcohol problem, a lot of my other problems evaporated. Like I thought before I quit drinking, I thought I was a highly anxious person. I'm still sort of anxious. Like I'm definitely a bit of a hypochondriac. Like alcohol didn't solve that problem at all. I'm also I also thought that, I would wake up after a night of drinking and be like, why did I say that? I'm such a loudmouth. Like, why did I say this? Alcohol didn't actually solve that problem. I'm still a loudmouth. I'm still a incorrigible gossip. I'm like not able to excuse all of my bad behavior by drinking. But it made everything else easier to deal with, right? So like any financial problems, other like more emotional issues, relationship issues, all of that became much easier to deal with when I didn't have this monkey on my back and I didn't have the secret too. Just the freedom of no longer having a giant secret, has been it's just been a very freeing experience.
Do you have other daily practices now that you've like done the method? Like, do you have other daily practices or tools that help you stay grounded?
I do not meditate. You and I have talked about this before, actually. I'm definitely not a meditator. I don't have any sort of spiritual practice. What I do is I walk in the woods. And, you know, you and I are both blessed to live in one of the most beautiful parts of the country. And so we have lots of big trees and occasional blue skies and lots of water surrounding us. And I find that for me, taking my dog for a walk in the woods is really grounding. And that's especially true when I'm going through something difficult. So I'm originally from North Carolina, from Western North Carolina, and Hurricane Helene, I own a house in Asheville, and my family lives there. And Hurricane Helene, I was not there. I was in Washington at the time, but Hurricane Helene was absolutely devastating to my community. And during that period, I found that the best way for me to sort of work through that was to go to the woods and listen to like music from home and just fucking cry. And just be totally alone with the dog. And that was really helpful. Like I worked through, I was able to release my emotions in a way that before I would have drowned them in a bottle. I might have ended up crying that night as well, but it wouldn't have been cathartic in a lasting way. But I don't do like, I'm like an aspiritual person. I don't believe in the soul.
I hear you.
I tried to get into, you know, I did at one point, I got Sam Harris's meditation app, and I would like try to do it and fall asleep. So I've never been able to keep up any kind of spiritual practice like that.
Did you ever listen to my series that I did on his app?
I didn't. I should. I absolutely should.
Just for curiosity's sake.
Yeah.
So you can hear the dulcet tones of my voice more often.
I think that would actually be, I'm always like looking for stuff to listen to while I'm sleeping. I think that would be good. I'm jealous of people who meditate, but also resentful. I'm so completely unable to sit and focus and be still.
Well, I mean, one might argue that that's just all you're curious. So here's what I would say, just to challenge you on that, is that you're a very curious person. You're a very introspective person. That's what meditating is. If you don't want to, I would argue that you walking in the woods alone is a form of meditation, because it's just walking meditation. A lot of people sit when they're meditating just so that they can be more focused and they're not as distracted per se. But that can be really overwhelming. And sometimes it's nice to have something that you're passively doing that allows you to go into the mind state of meditation, which is you're just observing your own thoughts. You're not finding yourself attached to them. That's all it is. So
it's not I think if I were ever going to meditate, I would want to do it on a beach with a pack of cigarettes. That sounds pretty good.
Okay. But cigarettes, I was actually going to ask you, because I think something that a lot of people are concerned about now, I was going to see if you were investigating other sort of medical miracles that are not being explored. But I know that a lot of people are concerned now.
Have you heard of ivermectin?
Ivermectin, yes. I've heard tell of ivermectin. But what about, nicotine addiction in young people that has arisen because of vaping? Because it seemed like we were almost done with nicotine, and then juuling became a thing. Is that something that you're investigating at all?
So I was a smoker. I smoked this whole time. While I was drinking, I was smoking too. And that is actually much harder to hide from the people around you.
You smell, well, I mean, alcohol can smell too, but you can brush your teeth more. And it's just everything
I
is
took a
gross.
lot of showers before my wife got home from work every day. She should have known just from our water bill alone that something was up. So I did smoke, and naltrexone doesn't activate sort of the same. They're all different, or substances operate on different systems in our brain. So cannabis operates on the cannabinoid system. I don't know actually what system nicotine operates on, but I did find myself smoking way less on naltrexone because it just made me feel kind of nauseous, and smoking cigarettes when you're nauseous doesn't feel very good. I quit actually when I quit smoking, or when I quit drinking, because for me, alcohol and tobacco were so intertwined. For 20 years, every time I drank, I'd have a cigarette, right? I loved smoking. I loved it. And then when I quit drinking, it was okay, now is the time to do it. I did, when I finally quit drinking, I still smoked for a little while afterwards, and a couple of weeks, but I still had that sort of addictive behaviors. I've always been for me, a big part of the appeal of smoking is the simple act of lighting a cigarette and picking it up and putting it in my mouth and then doing that 10,000 times. I love that sort of ritual. I don't know why, but there's something about the tactile nature of it that I really like. And so when I quit actually drinking, I switched for a little while to non-alcoholic beers, NA beers. And I would drink like 6 in a row, chain smoking, just to get that sort of the oral fixation, just to meet that. And then I was like driving across the country and I was like, all right, this is a great time to just quit smoking. I'm going to just do this all together. And then it's been fine ever since. It was actually kind of surprisingly easy once I quit drinking. And I think that's a fairly common experience, that people who are dual smokers and drinkers find that as they drink less alcohol, they smoke less tobacco. And there are lots of medications, like Wellbutrin is one that I think is pretty effective in terms of curbing cravings for nicotine. Juuling, vaping, I feel fucking sorry for these people who are doing it, because the thing about it is, like, with tobacco, when I started smoking cigarettes when I was in college, you could still smoke pretty much anywhere. You could smoke in your dorm room. There was like, as long as you're in my dorm, like as long as your roommate agreed, you could smoke in your dorm room. Like, it was wild. And this was in the 2000s. This was in North Carolina in the 2000s. This isn't in the 80s. And then of course you could smoke inside in bars. And then gradually, as the number of public spaces where you could smoke shrunk, I think we actually did sort of lose something valuable there, because smoking was, for me, it was very social. Like, I smoked alone, of course, but it was very social. You go to a bar and you bum a light from somebody, and then the next thing you know, you're friends with these people. So I met a lot of my close friends because we were smokers. And that, I think we have lost something with as people have quit smoking. But the thing about vaping is that you can do it anywhere. And that, to me, is really terrifying. And that's why I never tried to start vaping when I was trying to quit smoking, because I didn't want something that I could, I didn't want to get more addicted to something where I'm like waking up in the night and like pulling on a vape. Like, that to me that's horrifying.
This isn't therapy, but it might help you live better. On Hard Knocks, we ask, how do you move forward when life sideswipes you? How do you find meaning in the mess? If you're into those kinds of questions and want ad-free episodes, extra content, and essays to dig deeper, subscribe at amandaknox.substack.com. I can't promise I'll fix your life, but I can make you feel better about how weird it already is. Yeah, I've had these odd experiences where I've been sitting around a dinner table and the kid, pulls out the Juul from underneath the table and takes a puff while we're just all having dinner together. And it's what is happening?
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. And then now there's things, I hear ads on podcasts for a vape that's just flavored air. There's no chemical. People just, and maybe that's
it's the oral fixation again.
Right.
Yeah, it's the non-alcoholic beer of juuling.
And I'll say, I don't think that these attempts to regulate vapes out of existence, like we had in Washington State a couple years ago, there was the vape crisis. Remember that? So there were some deaths around the country over. It was not actually from Juul or from anything legal. It turns out that this was an additive in cannabis vapes, black market cannabis vapes from China that had an additive in them that was really dangerous for people. And in Washington State, where we live, the governor at the time and the legislature used that to really crack down on the availability of flavored vapes like mango. And it was two different issues. I thought it was a little bit dishonest, taking the issue of these deaths and using that to ban flavored vapes, because what you're really trying to target is children vaping. Vapes in the UK are really, you can get them through the NHS. They are used as a smoking cessation device. It's a form of harm reduction. And I think that's great. I know a ton of people who have used Juuls to get off of cigarettes. To me, that is undoubtedly a better thing to be addicted to. But still, like, obviously there's a problem if you have another generation of people coming up getting addicted to any substance. But, you know, they help people. They actually do save lives in some sense.
Is there any connection between addiction recovery and the ways that people are dealing with like identity and belonging?
Oh, I think absolutely. Yes, that's a great question. So for people who are addicts of any sense, like just speaking about my own experience, my identity as a drinker was, I thought of myself as a drinker. You know, that was a big part of my identity. Not something I was particularly proud of, but my friends thought of me as a drinker. I was that girl, right? I was the party girl. It was a huge part of my identity. And then I think for a lot of people, recovery becomes, once they quit, becomes a big part of their identity. Your life changes in so many ways, the way you spend your time, the people you spend your time with. And so you shift from the party girl to the sober girl, right? And that works really well for some people. The way that I got sober through the Sinclair method, that didn't really happen because my experience of getting sober didn't really require an identity shift. It was such a gradual kind of off-ramp. And I didn't join a recovery community. And I don't think about alcohol anymore, right? So I think about it now because I wrote this book and I'm talking to people like you and I'm thinking about it now. But for like the first year after I quit drinking, I didn't think about it. It was almost as though my brain had reverted to the state before I started drinking, right? It was like I had never started drinking in the first place. And so I don't even really, like, I don't think of myself as in recovery. I think of myself as recovered. And I think that's one of the beauties of this method is that ideally, if it works for you, you do it, you get clean, or a lot of people don't decide to get sober entirely. They want to like drink one glass of wine and not the whole bottle. They use it to moderate and you move on with your life. So it doesn't require this lifelong commitment to sobriety. It just requires that you take the pill.
And again, you're not like, the experience isn't white knuckling it through it. It's not a matter of willpower. It's just like hacking the brain. What about all those like secondary benefits that you enjoyed? Like you said, like you had friends who were smokers that you met met through smoking, or you're just like chilling out at the end of the day, smoking your cigarette and drinking your beer. Like what happens to how do you experience all of those secondary things?
You know, it's funny. I thought for years, it would be, this is one of the things that made it so hard to quit. I thought it would be impossible to have a good time without alcohol. Impossible to go to a dinner party or a show. Impossible to do anything without alcohol because it was such a part of my life, such a part of my social life. I never did anything sober. And I was also a huge pothead. So things like going to the grocery store, like, of course I'm smoking weed before I go to the grocery store. Are you crazy?
That's how you know what to shop
for. Exactly. Exactly. You listen to your body and it tells you that only Doritos. So, I genuinely, and this sounds crazy to people who've never experienced addiction, but I genuinely thought that life without alcohol, without substances would be miserable. And I am as shocked as anyone to report that that's completely not true. I went to dinner last night with some new friends. Everyone was drinking except for me. And it did not even occur to me to drink alcohol. I didn't think about it. I'm not craving it. I'm not sitting there going, oh, I wish I could drink. I'm like, oh, this sucks. Like, this would be so much more fun if I could drink. I just don't think about it. I don't think about it. It like does not enter my mind on a daily basis. And that's exactly what I wanted.
Cool. And does it help also that like other people don't like, I mean, I'm sure it helps that other people don't make a big deal about it. Cause like, I think it really depends. Like if your friends are like, oh, what do you want to drink? Oh, I would like a soda water. Like there's no like weird, like, why aren't you drinking? Or come on, you know?
Yeah. And I think that if I had tried to do this at 25, I don't know that it would have worked for me because my community, I was in such a heavy drinking community. Like I would have had to leave my community in order to make this happen. And when I was in my heaviest drinking days, you know, if a friend got sober, I was fucking pissed. I was resentful of that because even if a friend didn't get sober, just wasn't drinking because that was such a reminder of like a mirror being held up to me. Like, oh, you have a problem. Other people can quit. Why can't you quit? What is wrong with you? And also, you know, you and I are about the same age. obviously when, you were in your early 20s, you were having a very different experience, a very atypical experience. But for most of us who, I studied abroad in England, not in Italy, so for those of us who came of age, in the early 2000s, 90s, early 2000s, that was a very boozy time. And
I recall from the early college days before I went forcibly sober in a prison environment.
Yeah. So actually that might have been good for me. Like now that I think about it, that would have really gotten me off the sauce quick. So I think now it's just like you can see this in polling. Young people drink a lot less than our generation did. And I think there's some obvious upsides to that. There are some also obvious downsides because they're not just drinking less, they're also socializing less, they're having less sex, they're spending so much time on their phones that they're living in this, this sort of truncated adolescence. So, I mean, like I would never argue that alcohol doesn't have utility. It obviously does. There's a reason that people have been drinking it for 10,000 years at least. And I have had many good nights and bonding experiences with booze. It just stopped working for me.
Yeah. Speaking of screen addiction, is there any information about whether or not, like, what is going on in the brain with screen addiction? And like I feel like that's the most universal addiction that everyone is dealing with. I'm not sure that anybody is really actually. It seems right now like just people on their phones is like people smoking cigarettes back in the day. It's just like a universal, culturally accepted thing. But it is an addiction. Like, is it activating the same things, or have you looked into that at all?
I haven't. I don't know sort of what the reward system that brains or that phones tap into. I'm sure there's been research on this. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm very addicted to my phone, especially now. Like I try to get 10,000 steps a day. So taking a walk, I have to have my phone on me. When it's like not worth walking unless I have my phone because I got to count my steps. And I find myself, I'm like walking down the street and I take 100 steps and I'm like, what's going on the phone?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's become like I'm really hyper attuned to it right now just because I have very young kids. And like I will find myself checking my phone while I'm hanging out with my kid. And, my kid very justifiably like slaps my phone away. It's like, stop. I am jealous of your phone. And it's like, oh my God.
You got to give your kid the phone. That's what you do. Get an iPhone for your toddlers.
Right.
Problem solved.
They can be addicted to their phone too. And we are all self-justified.
Yes. Follow me on Instagram. Exactly.
All right. Well, is there anything else about this whole journey that you'd like to share, or any other like surprising things that you discovered along the way that are worth, people who have been trying everything and nothing has worked, they should know?
I think I mentioned this earlier, but my sort of overarching point of writing this book was that I want people to realize that there are options out there, even if this isn't the one for you. And I think society as a whole, like we are rethinking this sort of abstinence-based 12-step is the only way forward. We're rethinking that paradigm that has, I think, had a bit of a stranglehold on the culture for almost 100 years. There are ways out of addiction that do not require you going to 90 meetings in 90 days if those don't work for you. Maybe it's naltrexone, maybe it's swimming with dolphins. I don't know. But I think people need to be creative about it and not think that there's one way out of addiction. Because addiction, everybody has a different experience with it. And we're such a diverse population that what works for one person isn't going to work for everybody.
But you do have to be like, if you're going to go down that alt path, it helps if you're a very diligent person who's deeply curious and is willing to conduct experiments on themselves.
Yes, and willing to hold yourself accountable. And also just, one thing that AA encourages that I think is helpful is some sense of introspection, right? Why do you drink? Do you drink because of trauma or depression or anxiety, or do you just drink because you're addicted to alcohol? That's why I drank. I didn't drink because I had trauma. I drank because I started drinking at a young age and I drank a lot and I became an alcoholic. So I think there's this kind of there's this myth that we all have something like deeper inside of us that makes us drink. Some of us just drink because we drink. But AA does encourage this level of introspection that I think can be helpful for people. And you don't necessarily need meetings to do that. You can do that on your own. You can do that with friends. You can do that with professionals. You can do that with coaches. And some people don't really need that at all. Some people don't actually need to be introspective about it. They just need to quit drinking. And this is a one way to do it.
Cool. Well, where can people follow you, Katie?
So the book will be out on September 30th. It's available at whatever retailer, hopefully. And
fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers crossed. We'll see how that goes. And I have a podcast. It's called Blocked and Reported. Amanda was on it recently. Great fun. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm off of social media now for the most part, so don't find me on Twitter. I've given it up.
Good on you.
I'm off the sauce.
Good for you. You're off the sauce. All right. Show us how it's done. Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. It's been great.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.